So hello everyone, I'm Lucas Huber, Product and Tech Manager at Speedinvest. What is Speedinvest? We are one of the 10 arguably most active funds in Europe when it comes to early stage startups. We have roughly 1.2 billion assets under management in euros, so that's roughly, I don't know, $1.3 billion. I know for a lot of people in the audience, probably not too large, but for European standards, that's quite in the top rank. We have more than 400 investments by now. We are in our fourth fund cycle and about to raise our fifth fund generation coming next year. Overall, 75 employees. I mentioned this because it's quite relevant for some of the later talk. Especially, we have 6 investment teams that invest from all the way from health to fintech to marketplace and consumer. And we have, that's very critical, 6 different offices all across Europe. So we claim at least to be a truly pan-European fund. Our HQ, where I'm from, is in Vienna, Austria, where most of our horizontal team sits, but most of our IMs actually sit, as you can see, in London, in Paris, Berlin, and Munich. And we also have an office in Abu Dhabi. We used to have one in San Francisco, but so we've refocused a couple of years ago. The topic that I'm going to discuss with you today is a wild proposition, and that is use relationship intelligence for fundraising, that is to raise your next fund. This is actually not a rocket science at all, but most VCs don't do it. They treat relationship intelligence as something exclusively and solely devoted to deal flow management. And you can, in essence, to reduce it a little bit, follow sort of a deal flow approach when it comes to managing your existing and prospective LPs. And today I'm going to explain to you briefly the painful journey, how we got from this to something slightly more evolved. As you can see here with these screenshots, that is how we raised our first funds. So Speedinvest started in 2011. Our first fund was fairly small, only 10 million. Our latest fund was roughly 350 million. And the first 2 funds were just Google Sheets and Excels and thoughts and partners' brains, essentially. And not even like really worked out Google Sheets at all, because you can build a lot in Excel and Google. I mean, it's a little bit of a 90s methodology, but you can do it. No, what we had essentially was 5 different Excel sheets for each individual who was involved in fundraising. And whenever there was an event or something like that, we started collecting prospective LPs again, and then discussing who we should meet and so forth. Just a quick question to the audience: who is currently using Affinity for collecting relationship intelligence on their LPs? Oh, okay, so some happy few. So what made us turn this process around? As you can see here on the left, our yearly deal flow increased exponentially from 2017 onwards. I joined Speedinvest actually 10 years ago, back then as a part-time student still, but we had very little deal flow back then. It was mostly DACH-based, which is an acronym for German-speaking Europe, and we looked at roughly 1,000 leads. And then from there on, when we had our first vertical funds, we grew exponentially, and we now look at roughly 10,000 leads per year, all across Europe and also in the emerging markets. And there was a sort of a causality between them, also reflected in our LP base. As you can see here, for our first fund, we had roughly 50 LPs, a lot of family offices and small tickets from Austria. But starting with SF2 and especially with SF4, as you can see, our LP number count grew dramatically. So for SF4, we had 357, if I remember correctly, individual LPs. Now, when you look at that number, that doesn't mean that the average ticket size, or I should say the median ticket size, always stayed the same. In fact, you could say that roughly 80% of our latest fund was just generated by 36 LPs. And those LPs have a very different, let's say, investor profile than our original LPs, which, as I said, were a lot of family offices, small tickets, high net worth individuals. Nowadays, it's a lot of institutional investors, corporate investors. We have our dedicated corporate program for those investors if they raise above a certain threshold. Just to illustrate this as an example, this touches on, for example, big industrial companies in southern Germany, where a lot of the car manufacturing sort of base of Germany is based, but also institutional investors like banks and the European Investment Fund that does a lot of investments into European funds. And bottom line is that data could no longer even remotely be caught in those messy Excel sheets that we had before. I mean, to be fair, it wasn't caught in SR1 either, but these delusions we could not maintain with those bigger funds. Just to recap this was arguably in the early days, in the dark days of the beginning, how we conceptualized the data. You can see this here. Basically, the data existed in Microsoft Word documents, Gmail, that Gmail PDFs were not pushed into Drive. You had a lot in meetings, obviously, that were not synced. The Drive structure was arguably somewhat messy. And then you can see this strange light bulb icon there. That's not a new tool or a legacy tool. That just means the data existed in people's heads. Because when you start raising a new fund, often you have critical founding partners with a strong network that come into play. And those partners are often either unwilling to share their network with the wider team, or I shall put it diplomatically, unwilling to put in the data or in any way adapt their processes beyond the, let's say, late 1990s. With step 2, we try to change that. So as you can see here, we in the beginning of 2020, we actually created a dedicated fundraising team, which has the somewhat unfortunate name Capital Formation Client Services. I didn't pick the name, but it's CFCS. And that's a combination of some of our founding partners, but also some additional fresh faces that were solely devoted to fundraising. So is there, I was wondering, in your teams, a dedicated fundraising team, or is it more like, it's a seasonal task for your partners? So how do you do fundraising? Show of hands if you have a dedicated team, or is that not? Okay, interesting. And we really tried to now create and use Affinity for that. We started with Affinity in 2020, and our really sole, or I'd say not sole, but primary motivator to change CM tools was actually to use CM for something more than pure deal flow management. Our previous, not to be named CM tool was also quite good at deal flow management, but it could only do that. There were now no other lists that you could create, portfolio management, investor network management, let alone fundraising management was not possible. And therefore we changed to a new tool, but then the thing is, basically we adopted, migrated, and then for a year nothing happened. So that's another one of those interesting things. We changed the tool for that purpose, and then took us a year to really get the sort of the car running and actually move into the direction where we had new lists that we actually not just conceptualized, let's say where I built a list and presented it to everyone and said, this is great, use it, and then nothing happened, but actually to create something that most of our AMs or the relevant actors for that particular list were using. And this is now with step 3, where we try to really combine everything into a centralized strategic engine for fundraising. So with step 2, we imported various different, actually I can go back here, lists. As you can see here, these are for all of our vertical funds we had back then. So there was a fundraising tracker for SRX2, which was our marketplace vertical, or one for green industries, those for small dedicated funds, and each one of them had their own unique list. This was much better than what we had in Excel before, but it was still arguably not very consolidated. We always created a new list. Whenever we started raising for a new fund, we had to onboard the new team because we didn't have yet this dedicated fundraising team. So for example, for SRX, most of the fundraising was done by the marketplace investment team. For SRF, most was done by the fintech team, and you always had to onboard them anew and show them the ways, and there was very little, let's say, insights gained from the previous fundraising journey. And also, just as a side note, you can see here some of those lists were organization lists and others were opportunity lists. There might be some special circumstances where I recommend you to use an organization list. Let's say if you have 5 institutional LPs and that's it. But otherwise, I strongly recommend using an opportunity list. What the original lists created for us were a lot of fake companies, because what we had to do was create pseudo companies for individual investors. So let's say, not that I am, but I'm a high net worth individual that invests into Speedinvest. Then we would create a Lucas Huber in brackets org. And this was what we stored as a row or as an entity then in that list. And then one spent a week just manually deleting all of those organizations a couple of years later, because it was quite a messy process and really did not utilize the auto-enrichment that is possible in Affinity at all. And as you can see, then we changed to opportunity lists, and with the new process, so the current process, we tried to combine this all into one new big list. This is just called the Lead and LP Tracker. And in that list, we do not just track the currently ongoing fundraising endeavor for SR5, so for our upcoming fund, but really all of our legacy investors, all the way from SR1 to hopefully SR5, all prospective LPs, all LPs that maybe will not come into play with SR5, but we are sort of connecting now and hoping to gain them for SR6. So to both manage the legacy investors and the ongoing fundraising journey for SR5. And for that, we tried to also integrate our list with various tools. One of them, very critically on the right, you can see is VC Bricks, which is our sort of semi-self-built fund admin platform. But you, in your head, can replace it with your own fund admin platform, where we feed a lot of data that exists there into Affinity to really give our fundraising team the opportunity, when they talk with an existing or prospective LP, what's the relationship to them. Basically, one of the founding partners told me in the beginning of this, if tomorrow on the street I meet an existing LPs of ours, I want a cheat sheet in my pocket telling me this is how much they invested in SF3, this is how much in SF4, what are our strongest contacts to them, where they're located, and I'm not sounding like a fool telling them just, you're an investor and that's it. And especially if you have so many investors as we do, in total more than 700, that is difficult to keep in your head. We also obviously use, I mean, that goes without saying, Gmail, Calendar, and Zoom, all tools that we very much rely upon. We use Apollo and various other email enrichment tools. I come to this later, why this is very useful for us. But just to illustrate it on one point, let's say one of our fundraising partners goes to, I don't know, Hamburg in northern Germany. Then we try to identify all potential LPs from that region, so northern Germany, and find the right people at those LPs that we could reach out to, fetch their email addresses, and then to the ones where we think we have a good shot of reaching out to them, we reach out through our funding partners. Slack and Airtable, and what you see there on the lower right is our proprietary portal that we've built for our founders mostly, but now also for LPs, but I will get to this later. There's a clear distinction between VC Bricks and Affinity that I think is also relevant to you. So in VC Bricks, again, replace this with your fund admin platform. It is our single source of truth for both our portfolio and for our LPs. So when it comes to things like, for example, portfolio, how much did we invest in total? Who are, let's say, the original founders? What vertical does this belong to? Who's the senior IM for that company? All of that data sits in VC Bricks. The same goes for LPs. So things like what are the legal entities behind the investor, behind the parent investor, because sometimes, to use an example for the European Investment Fund, you will have 3 different legal entities investing all together. All of that data is stored in VC Bricks, and it serves as a single source of truth for that. However, it's our very strong opinion that for anything when it comes to relationship intelligence, Affinity should be the source of truth. And that applies, again, not just for deal flow management, but to portfolio. So if I want to find out who are the, let's say, CTOs currently active at our Series A companies, as in currently Series A in London, I go to Affinity, and I don't store this in VC Bricks. We have some ideas of pushing this data back to VC Bricks from Affinity, but right now this data is really primarily stored in Affinity, and it will remain sort of the core source of truth for that. And the same goes for LPs, because yes, things like legal entities and so forth are in VC Bricks, but who are the people you're actually talking with at the respective LP? That is something that also exists in Affinity. To give you an example, some of our institutional investors are big banks, and we sometimes, according to Affinity, have 300 contacts to those banks. Well, not all, I would say, of those contacts are relevant for retaining them as an investor. Actually, there are mostly only 2 or 3 people that are critically important to keeping them as investor for SF5 in our circumstances. And that is also why, by the way, an opportunity list is so important, because in an opportunity list, you can assign dedicated people to the opportunity and not everyone who you have ever talked with at this organization like 5 years ago. So here you can see a somewhat redacted screenshot from our list. So as it says here, it's the master tracker, it's SF5 and SIG2. So that's the fund generation we're raising. Not to bore you too much with the details, but SF5 is the main fund and G2 is our opportunity fund, roughly the same size that we're raising to then facilitate additional Series A money and follow-on money to our most successful startups during that generation. And we use that list, as you can see, to really track all existing and prospective LPs for that. I'm not sure how is it with you? You don't have to overshare, of course, but with us, nearly 80% of our, let's say, investor base for SF4 were legacy investors, meaning we had them before and they came back. Would you say your number is above 50%? Please raise your hand. Okay, interesting. Yeah, so it's very critical to keep that relationship with those investors, of course, and Affinity makes that possible, because if I had asked like 3 years ago, well, what LP have we not talked with for 5 years? There are these LPs. Then no one would have really known. This Affinity allows us to proactively reach out to them, because there could be various reasons for that. It could be that they have long forgotten us, or it could be that they are so satisfied with us and that they really do not need any additional input from us. So what does Affinity allow here? I mean, I'm not sure you can see this all, but here you can see some of the dedicated fields that we have for the currently ongoing fundraising journey. As you can see here, there's a fundraising goal. There's a little asterisk next to it, meaning it's required when you add a new LP. A prospective LP, so you're always required to add a fundraising goal. You can also add a 0 if you think this is not a viable LP for this particular fund. But the importance here is that we do not just, mass bulk import 1,000 potential LPs and then have no qualitative input, but that we actually fill this data based on status and moving it really through the pipeline journey. We also have a weighted goal in the beginning. And this is also where Affinity is super useful, because in our previous Excel endeavors, we also had a weighted goal, but it was sort of only an initial weighted goal, meaning we said in the beginning, for example, we want to raise 40 million from that particular LP. We think the probability is 90%, so our weighted goal is then 36 million. And then we go through the journey with them and we say it's a hard commit. And in the Excel sheet, however, the weighted probability always stayed the same. Actually, this was only really a weighted probability for the initial, let's say, onboarding of them as a potential LP, but afterwards it didn't work at all. And what Affinity allows for an opportunity list to give you weighted probabilities on each status type. So we can say, if we get a soft commit, we say 66% and they will become an actual investor. And through that way, we can then create a dashboard where we actually track how likely it is that we are going to raise the fund in the period that we set out to do. You can also see a very important field here called VC Bricks Reference for Enrichment. And here we built an API integration in VC Bricks. The unique objects are all legal entities. And this is obviously relevant, but not so much for our fundraising team. If our fundraising manager speaks with EIF, EIF probably will not ask them, hey, how much did we invest with this particular legal entity? He wants to know, or she wants to know, how much EIF, the parent investor, invested in total into each fund. And what we did here is through the API integration, we always have to put in here the VC Bricks references, which are certain IDs, and then it aggregates all the data in Affinity and combines it into one single parent investor. And this does not just apply to mere sums, but also to things like who are the people we're talking with across the different legal entities and so forth. Obviously, Affinity is really great here to track last contact and last meeting, when to reach out to them, but more on this slightly later. What we also built, this is for SI4, so I'm sorry to say I'm not sharing it for the current fund cycle, but this is a dashboard that we built for the latest fund, where you can see, for example, the weekly soft commits that we had per week. And this was really powerful of actually showing to us if we were on track when it came to fundraising. Did we, could we say by, let's say, summer that our first closing target was completely off, or was there a good chance that we could meet it? And then we could communicate this to the management team, or the fundraising team could communicate this to the management team and make, let's say, changes based on this. We also tracked, as you can see, the total goal that we had, soft commits, hard commits. So all of that really gave us then the opportunity to send this out also as a weekly report. I think back then it was monthly report to the management team without having to do it through any, let's say, manual changes. The strategic impact of this is, of course, super relevant because it really allowed us to create automations now with the new system. What we can do, for example, whenever, as I said, with an event comes up, we create unique views. One of them could be called London institutional investors. And we know in our event calendar for our fundraising team that one of our partners is going there. We send this view to them. They look at the list. They assess who should maybe accompany them. We no longer have this somewhat messy idea that, well, person X is the strongest context there, so he should go, but we can actually reflect it by data. One great example of this recently, so we have a new chairman, Yang Son, former president of Samsung, and he did a business trip with our founder to South Korea and Japan. And in the past, we would have probably said, well, it's Yang, so he probably knows the entire region, and therefore we do not have to reflect any other data. And yes, he's by far, not to reveal too much else, our strongest contact there, but there are indeed some other partners who have strong contacts in the region, and we should facilitate their network as well. And what this allows us now is to leverage the entire network in our wide partner base, and beyond that, even on a principal level, associate level, beyond that, even in the horizontal team, and look at who has a strong connection there. And then this we facilitate to create inroads into that regions as well. Because especially in Europe, this is very critical because it's such a, let's say, non-centralized region, right? We have more than, as I mentioned before, 20 different investor countries, Germany, UK, France, and so forth. And therefore, we need to leverage the entire network because otherwise we would still be stuck somewhere between Switzerland, Austria, and Germany. The takeaways for you, arguably, if you have not started with it yet, is to untangle the mess. If you're still using Excel sheets to really consolidate your data, and then I would very strongly recommend you to use either Affinity or some other tool to really get all that data. And then create an opportunity list. There are some, let's say, arguments to be made to create separate lists, but I would still, we can talk about this later, recommend creating in the current structure one consolidated list that both combines your existing and prospective LPs, and then to really start your fundraising journey on that level. And there's so many automations that can be built on that level. What you can do, for example, is status. You create a status trigger. The fundraising partners need to fill out based on each status as a certain note that the fundraising goal has changed, the probability has changed, that certain contacts have changed. What we also do is we try to evaluate based on the notes if there is a strong likelihood that the founder, or sorry, not the founder, but the LP will come back. Because we only started this now to really enforce proper note-taking also with the AI note-taker and the granola integration so that all the notes that we get from those meetings feed into the system. And through that, we then hope to evaluate with some, not just hearsay, but actual data if there is a relationship that goes into the right direction or not. What are the plans for the future? Gatsby, very important. We've been using it for roughly a year, but only starting with the integration properly now to really track event attendance for events. So that means that for all of our big investor days and quarterly meetings, analyst calls, you name it, we try to push the data into Affinity and then truly assess what of our investors require, let's say, a lot of hand-holding or not, and then to proactively reach out to them. LPs usually enjoy if you proactively reach out to them and not that they constantly have to chase you. Of course, there are exceptions, and you see that reflected. We can then send out, let's say, every 6 months, let's say a reconvenient meeting and say, hey, how are you guys doing? Do you need any feedback from us? And if they tell us, then it's all good. I sometimes attend the analyst calls, but that's it. Then we mark this as a status and we leave it at that. So we don't want to overburden them, but the ones that maybe need a little bit more hand-holding, we try to catch that way proactively. What is our core goal for the next, arguably 6 months, is to create a self-serve LP portal. So to really engage the LPs on that level, we created this entire portal on that front, and through where our founders can log in. So it's built with Airtable and a tool called Softer. And through that, the founders can connect with each other. They get access to certain perks. We have in total saved, I think, 3 million euros that way through our founders. So to illustrate this, AWS credits or something like that. And we also now want to create something similar for LPs. They won't get any perks, but what they will get is access to potential pilots for our founders. So we want to also create a so-called semantic search for our deal flow, where if you log in as a LP, you write. One of the weirdest examples I got there was vegan paint solutions for fleet management. Okay, so you write that in, and then you actually, through our entire deal flow, get the result of if we have anything in the system. And it's really powerful because for our corporate investors, maybe this is the same for you, they often do not invest for, let's put it that way, monetary reasons primarily, but actually to learn how VC operates and to get access to those very promising early startups. And through that semantic search and through that portal, we hope to facilitate this to them in a cleaner way. Cool. Then I think that's about it. If you have any questions, please go ahead.
Hi, I have a couple of questions. So I'll start with the first one is, how do you find the integration for Airtable? Is that meaningful and helpful? I've been trying to figure out a way to link it because we currently use Airtable as our source of truth. So I just don't know how, like what type of information is shared through the integration.
So you mean what specific fields we share, or?
Yeah, and then is it both ways, or does it just go from Affinity to Airtable, or from Airtable to Affinity, or is it shared back and forth?
So right now, I believe it's only going Affinity to Airtable. However, yeah, now actually no, because of the VC Bricks integration, we push data, right? We push data from VC Bricks into Airtable and then into Affinity. So there are exceptions to this, but most of the data we do, I think, someone from Affinity, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have the most API calls out of all their customers. Maybe that's also some bad coding from our side, but we mostly push data like people-related data. So when it comes, for example, to our founders, or who are the CTOs of our companies, all the organizational data we push from Affinity for our portfolio companies into Airtable. Also things like experts we recommend to our founders, and even things like perks, because we store our perks primarily in Airtable, so there's a lot of manual input there as well, but we also try to employ the auto-enrich data from Affinity through that. And sort of as a bonus to you, we actually have in GitHub one public page that I can share with you later, where we illustrate some of the coding we've done on that front.
And then, sorry, question number 2. If you only have one opportunity list that has everyone on it, how do you manage those prospect LPs that are not a fit, so you won't necessarily be approaching them for, say, this fundraising cycle, but you want to just have the information and collect it on them, but they're not going to be going to be approached for this fund?
Views. So hundreds of views. So essentially you create a status type that could be a hold status type, and it's called SI6 engage later. And going back to our, just to show you one screenshot there, to this tracker, as you can see, there's a filter on it. So on the very right, there are 4 filters on it. So that means this SI5 SFG2 master tracker, it only shows open fundraising opportunities for this particular 2 funds. Everything else, where we say they will not come back for this fund, or they will not come back at all, or they will only come in with SI6, all of that is not shown here. And this is how we operate on that level. So essentially, always think of views as lists within lists, instead of creating multiple lists, because that always creates so much duplicate work. It's a sort of high principle of Affinity. When you can build it within an existing list, always do. Sometimes there are certain security concerns, but otherwise, no. Yeah.
You mentioned the example of like having one of your partners run into an LP on the street and being able to open up, I'm assuming it was Affinity, to be able to understand what that LP is invested in. Are you writing that in the notes section on the individual, or is there tagging? Like, what does that view look like for your partner as they're opening it?
Yeah, I mean, this is then, I don't have a screenshot now on the mobile app, obviously, but it's sort of it's not 100% the same, of course, but as you can see here, the fields that show up here are all quite relevant for the ongoing fundraising journey. And don't like equate it with what is then shown for in the mobile app, but really we only try to push in the information that is relevant for that particular journey. There are like probably 100 fields in that list entirely, but the things that are super critical on this going pedestrian sort of approach, that is shown there in the mobile version. Yeah.
This is great, thanks. I just want to get a little bit more specific on the opportunity list to the follow-up question before. If you have an LP that has different, kind of almost like different structures underneath it, and let's say in Fund 1, you had these contact people, and in Fund 2, it was different contact people. If it's all in the same opportunity, how do you differentiate the contact people between each?
I mean, I indicated this before a little bit. There is a compromise to be reached here. So in a perfect world, I would have, let's say, a parent row, and then I would have sub rows, and the parent row would aggregate everything, and then it would be SI1, SI2, SI3, SI4, and it would clearly outline it. This is currently not possible, so what we try to do is we only try to accurate the data that is relevant now. To illustrate this with sort of the example you used, if the contact we had for SI1 is no longer with the company, so with the respective LP, and is really only a legacy contact, we remove him from the people list. So that data then will not be stored there because it's no longer relevant there. And really the only people that are associated with the respective opportunity are the ones that match the currently ongoing fundraising journey. And that's sort of the compromise you got to meet between having a lot of legacy data there, which is ultimately very important for knowing your LPs and retaining them, but also having it an ongoing live pipeline for your currently ongoing fundraising journey.
And then one other follow-up question. If one LP invests into one fund through multiple entities, do you treat each entity as a separate opportunity, or do you roll that all up?
No, here we aggregate it. That's why I can't. This example is not ideal because it doesn't have a VC Bricks reference. But sometimes you will have, for European Investment Fund, for example, 5 different references here, and then it aggregates it through the integration automatically, because in this very remote chance that the legal entity would be relevant for our fundraising team, they would have to go to VC Bricks to look this up. But this hardly ever comes up, really. If Daniel, for example, the founding partner in our CFCS team, talks with an LP, he really only wants to know what have they invested in total in SI4, in SI3, what's the retention rate between those funds, and not, they invested 5 million with that legal entity and 5 million with that legal entity. Unless, of course, there are always exceptions to this rule, if it's a very, let's say, federalized company. There's one bank, for example, that has multiple different entities, and this we actually track as different rows. Because why? There are different decision holders for each of them. If there's not a single person, or let's say not a single person, but not 2 or 3 people who ultimately say, yes, all those 3 legal entities will invest in unison, then we try to separate it.
Can you speak a little bit about getting legacy information into Affinity and what your experience was? You'd done several raises prior to setting it up for, I think it was SI3 or 4. Could you just talk a little bit about the previous records and getting them in?
Yeah, so twofold sort of for, let's say, prospective LPs. So those big lists that we had in the past, these brainstorming ideas where we came to who have we talked with in the past, a lot of this was built from scratch, essentially, and sort of cleaning up parts of this very jumbled data. On the other hand, for our existing LPs, that data did indeed exist in VC Bricks and in our previous fund admin platform. There we had to really analyze the data, extract it, build this API integration, and then aggregate it, as you can see with this VC Bricks reference, so all the legal entities into these combined parent investors, sometimes then still talk. Actually, we had I think 4 or 5 sessions between our investor relations team and our fundraising team where we still had 50 different legal entities where we had to make sort of a judgment call. Are those 2 different investors or is that one? But that was fairly organized still. When it came to those non-investors that we had talked to in the past, we relied very much on the Affinity relationship intelligence, right, that automatically fed in. And then we tried to sometimes find at least, let's say, the best Excel sheet where some of the data were stored and push it into the system.
Awesome. Thank you, Lucas. Everyone, round of applause for Lucas. That was a great session. Loved all those questions.